Good, good day, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We are starting, right? So, good afternoon, esteemed listeners. We're starting our webinar, How to Export Furniture to Sweden and the EU. I'm Alexander. I work in the Trade Department of the Embassy of Sweden in Ukraine. I will be moderating this webinar. I will be asking questions to our speakers. Our plan is very simple. We have prepared this event together with our colleagues from the Swedish Trade Agency, and their task is to advise to all the and consult all the interested entrepreneurs, those who want to export to Sweden. They consult about the rules in the market. We will first listen to the presentation from Emma Wallfeld, and she will talk about certification and rules. And then consultant Tove Antonissen will talk more about marketing, will present some marketing information. And the third speaker, Mr. Volodymyr Turchin from Ukrainian company, he will share with us the Ukrainian view on Swedish Nordic market. He will talk about his lessons. We would like to make this webinar interactive. Please at Facebook write your comments. I will then read them to our speakers and they will answer your questions after the presentation. Also, under this video, you can find the link to the English version, which will be broadcast on YouTube. So please write your messages in YouTube.
Please, Emma, floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you see my presentation? So my name is Emma. I and my colleague Tove will talk about meeting the requirements for export to the EU and Sweden. So I work at the National Board of Trade, which is a government agency in Sweden working with trade and EU internal market. And Open Trade Gate Sweden, where I work, it is a unit within the National Board of Trade. We are a one-stop contact point, and our mission is to facilitate trade from developing countries to Sweden and the EU. We provide information so on the market, on rules and requirements for export to Sweden and the EU. We do this by giving information to exporters on their specific products. We also do webinars and seminars like this one. And we also work in long-term projects, helping exporters and export promotion organizations. All our services are free of charge, and you can contact us anytime at info@opentradegate.se. So if you have any questions after this session that you don't want to take in the Q&A, you are more than welcome to email us and we will try to help you. I also want to recommend our website. It is, you see the link here. Here we have information on exporting to Sweden and the EU. We also have some market studies. Right now we have market studies on fresh fruit, processed food, and textiles. But we can also we will also develop this further. We also have a section on how to find a buyer, if that's interesting to you. And just some facts about Sweden. We are a fairly big country, but a rather small population. We're only around 10 million people. And around 90% of the people live in southern part of the country. And almost 50% of the households are single households. The average family has about 2 children, 1.9 children. And we have fairly high taxes that pay for a large public sector, so education, healthcare, and so on. We are very dependent on our exports. So 40% of our GDP comes from exports. So we are a small open economy. We're also very dependent on our imports. So almost 20% of the value of the export comes from goods that we have imported. And so we are, Sweden is a member of the European Union, and European Union is now 27 member states since Brexit and the UK withdrew in January this year. The EU is a customs union, and this means that there are the same import customs duties for import to all EU countries. There is no import formalities within the EU. So when a good has been cleared in one country, it means that it can flow freely around all countries. There are also the same product regulations and requirements. I will talk more on the next following slides on this, but it is good for you to know that if you live up to the requirements in one country, you will live up to requirements in other countries. And the EU has around 500 million consumers, so it is a big market. And since there's no import formalities within the EU, it also means that if you find a distributor or a buyer in one country, it will be fairly easy to distribute it to other countries as well. So there are a few things that you might need to research or make assessment about. We call this the road to export. We have divided this into 4 parts. So first is information about your product. Then it's market research for the product, finding a buyer, and conditions for export. So I will start with discussing information about the product. And then Tove will discuss market research and finding a buyer. And I will come back and talk about the conditions for export. And hopefully, after this research, you will be able to carry out an export and the products are on the shelf in the EU. So first of all, the product. You need to ask yourself, what are the legal requirements in the EU for my product or products? Do they meet the EU requirements? And are there any specific standards or certification required? So the requirements, first of all, there are the legal requirements. These are mandatory, set out by the governments. However, it may also be some organic certification that could apply. These are voluntary, so you don't have to live up to these. And there's also private standards that is also voluntary. I will touch more upon these in the next following slides. So first of all, the legal requirements. These are set by governments, and this is to get market access. So to be able to sell your product in the EU, products have to live up to certain requirements. These can be technical requirements, so specific product requirements, for example, textile labeling for textiles. It can also be CE marking of products, and these are usually products that are machinery or construction products or more technical. But it can also be toys, for example. And CE mark proves that your product has conformed to the EU legislation. And basically, all products have some kind of requirement attached to them. There are also sanitary and phytosanitary rules. These are for agricultural products in order to protect human, animal, and plant health. And these products usually need a certificate when they enter the EU. But since this do not apply to you, I will not go into more detail here regarding this. But moving on to furniture and home decoration, I will give a few examples here. However, if you have other products that's not mentioned and that you want information on, feel free to email me afterwards, and I will compile information regarding your specific product. We can also find out the product code, if there are any customs duty that applies. So feel free to email us and we will try to help you. So I have here taken an example of wooden furniture and the requirement attached to that. But as I said, this is an example. So if there's other products, for example, if there's a lamp, an electrical product, other requirements are attached to that product. But for wooden furniture, first of all, there is a general product safety requirement, and this applies to all products put on the EU market. They have to be safe. And a safe product is when there's no risk when you use it. And if there's any risk, the producer or importer must inform the customers of the risk. So there's no certificate needed for this requirement. It is just to thinking about if there is any risks attached to the product. So is there anything that might be can fall off or anything like that? It's just being aware of the risks. And if you see any risk, informing the customers of that. The second requirement for wood products on the EU market, it is the control of illegal timber. This is called the timber regulation, and this is made in order to prohibit illegally harvested timber products to be put on the EU market. And this requires operators, which is both landowners in the EU, but also importers who import wood and wooden furniture, to do a due diligence system. So this means that they should do a risk assessment and a risk mitigation to make sure that there's no illegally harvested timber coming into the EU market. And they also have to have a traceability or information on how this risk assessment has been made and save these for 5 years. So this means that even though it is the importer who is responsible for this, they will most likely ask you as a producer question regarding how can you prove where the timber comes from and that it is not illegally harvested. And lastly, it is the CITES, so the Endangered Species Protection. This is in order to protect certain endangered species of animals and plants. So this is if you're using wood or leather that comes from endangered animals or plants. You need to be aware of this, and there will be some plants or products of plants that are not allowed to enter the EU, but there are others that you may allow to import, but then you would need a certificate for this. There's a long list of the plants and the products that are forbidden and that need a certificate. So if you have if you're using wood that you might think that could be endangered, you can contact us, and we can help you see if this wood is in fact on this CITES list or if it's free to import. And this, of course, goes for all of these product specific requirements. If you have any questions, you can contact us. And then some mandatory requirements for home decoration. So I choose here a rug and a ceramic bowl. So the rug, the requirements applies to basically all textile products put on the EU market. And these are first labeling of textiles. So all textiles in the EU has to be labeled, saying what fibers are used and how much. There's also the restriction on the use of certain chemicals, and this is in order to make sure that there's no harmful chemicals used in the production. So when you produce textiles, you need to be aware of what chemicals are used in the process to make sure that there is no harmful chemicals used. Again, here there's also a list of the chemicals and how much you're allowed to use. So you can either find it online or you can contact us. And thirdly, it's the CITES, the Endangered Species Protection that I talked about in the last slide. And it's the same here. If you're using leather from an endangered animal, you must make sure that either you cannot export them or you might require a certificate. And as I said, these requirements apply to all textile products. Also, if you see on the picture here, this sofa that is upholstered. So for that sofa, the requirements for the wooden product would apply, but also the textile, these requirements for textile would apply because it's both. This contains both. And the ceramic bowl, first, one requirement is the general product safety, as I talked about earlier. So again, it is to make sure that there's no risk, so nothing that can fall off and injure someone or something like that. And then if the ceramic bowl is being used for eating on, you need to make sure that these articles do not transfer any material onto the food. You also need to label the articles for food contact or with a glass and a fork. Again, there's also lists of what you are not allowed, what kind of materials and chemicals you're not allowed to use in this production of these articles. So there's also a lot of information online, but you can also contact us. So one of the information sources online I want to just show you, it is called the Trade Help Desk, and this is from the European Commission. And it shows all the requirements and the duties for all different products. So you simply choose, I want to export from Ukraine to a member state, so for example, Sweden, and then you write in your product code. And then you will find the duties, the requirements, and also if there are any national requirements attached to the product. This is free of charge, anyone can use it, and it has a lot of good information. So I have now talked about the legal requirements, but I also want to mention private standards and certifications that are requirements that are set by importers. We sometimes refer to this as to get shelf access. So it's not only necessary to fulfill the legal requirements to get market access, but sometimes importers demand certain certifications from you. These can be very different in their objectives and scope, but we see that it is increasingly popular to demand different certifications and standards among importers and distributors here in the EU. So an example I can just give you is the timber regulation, the control of illegally harvested timber that I discussed earlier. Many companies have decided that the certification FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council certification, is one way of showing that the producers are aware of where the timber comes from. So some importers demand this FSC private standard in order for them to be able to live up to the mandatory requirements, this timber regulation. So again, this can very different depending on who is importing, where the standards are, but I just want to make you aware of these private standards as well. There are also the organic certification. These are voluntary, but it is regulated on an EU level. So you can use this in all EU member states. For non-food product, this is called the flower logo. And it can be put on a very many different types of products. For example, textiles and furniture. You have to pay an application fee and then a yearly fee to be able to use the logo. But once you can use it in all member states. And it has to fulfill certain criteria. So the use of heavy metals, plastic, and so on. And then I just want to show you an information source on these standards. This is from the ITC, so the International Trade Center. They have a standards map, and it provides information on standards and code of conduct in many different products and sectors. So here you might see that I have selected coffee as a product, and I have found 53 different standards that could apply to the coffee. So here you can search different standards, and you can also read more about the different standards. So that was all for me. I will now hand over to my colleague Tove, and she will continue with to the other parts of the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Emma. I hope you can hear me, and I hope that you can see my screen, which I'm sharing right now. And I trust someone will tell me if it doesn't work. As Emma just told you, we have 4 steps outlined. Emma just talked about the product and requirements attached to it. And now it's my pleasure to talk you through market research and what you can do to find out opportunities for your product, as well as the 3rd step, finding a buyer. So yes, indeed, Sweden, a country up in the north of Europe, part of the European Union, as Emma just pointed out, relatively small in terms of people population. So you are reaching a potential customer base of 10 million people, but also relatively rich in terms of GDP per capita. So Sweden, the yellow country next to the green Finland up there on the map. And just to quickly talk you through what sort of the characteristics of Sweden, what are we talking about when we talk about Sweden as a country? First of all, and this will be partly familiar to you, we have 4 seasons in our climate. And well, the snowy picture you see over there, this is the opposite time of the year from what we have right now, where we're entering midsummer weekend. This is obviously in the winter. Snow, of course, and sun is known in several countries. Up in the north, however, we're also faced with cold and dark days in the winter. And now, of course, light and bright nights, if you like. Sorry. Like I said, GDP per capita is above average, and something which also shapes the Swedish market, if you like, are the geographic distances. Sweden is a small market in terms of how many people live there, but it's quite a large country. You can drive for a couple of days from south to north. East to west will be only a couple of hours, but it's that's the shape of it, and that's also something the market deals with. Now, what has that given rise to, if you like? Well, this is a little bit my interpretation of why the Swedish retail market, if you like, looks the way it does. But I think the long and dark winters, preceded by often wet and also getting towards dark autumns, have given rise to indoor shopping malls. And these are very popular. So you cluster a lot of shops in one place where you stay indoors and do all your shopping. Already pointed out, Sweden is above the EU average in terms of GDP and also above average spenders, which is of course good if you want to sell your products in Sweden. And the geographic distances, I think this, and in combination with everything mentioned already, I think this has led to Sweden actually paving the way for a lot of e-business. Ordering online is something which a lot of Swedes have done to some extent, and a lot of them do it regularly. And this, whichever way you look at it, this trend is set to increase. And now turning to the products which you as listeners are active in. Just to point out, I've taken these market figures from Trade Map. It's also an ITC tool. Emma just mentioned Sustainability Map. All of these are mentioned here, so you can also check out more details yourselves if you would like later on, or as Emma pointed out, ask us, and we will be happy to do it for you. What I've selected here are exports from Ukraine to Sweden and the top 10 products. And I think the yellow highlights that I show here are also quite representative of what you are working with in your sector. So we have wood and we have furniture with textiles, basically. There are no real figures from Ukraine for last year, 2019. The basic trend that we can see here is that there was an increase up until 2018, and after that, overall imports also to Sweden showed a decline. So could be a little bit the same, I think, probably for Ukraine. What we see here basically is that Sweden and Ukraine are not really large trade partners. However, as we also pointed out, sometimes it's a little bit of a blur what's European and what's Swedish. So it could be that some products will enter the Swedish market through another European country, which I will explain here also. If we zoom in on furniture, for instance, and the bedding mattresses, that HS code, the main suppliers to Sweden, we have China, which we tend to find in several export categories, of course. And then you can see that it's topped by European countries, Poland, Lithuania, Denmark, and Germany. This could be partly production. This could also be partly clustered imports and re-exported to Sweden. Now, zooming in a little bit on the Swedish furniture market, we have more than 13,000 people employed in this market. If we look at annual production in Sweden, we see that it's 25 billion Swedish crowns. Don't know if you pointed it out specifically, but Sweden has its own currency, does not have the euro, but the Swedish crowns. Consumption, as you can tell, is above production in Sweden, and retail sales is almost 40 billion Swedish crowns. To do a quick maths here, if you want to do it into euros, always divide by 10. Doesn't really cover it all, but it's almost. Now, having pointed out that consumption is larger than production, there are more things that goes with it. Because if we look to the right-hand side of the screen, we have Swedish exports. And the export rate of production is 75%. This means, and of course that the next row also indicates the importance of Europe. On the other hand, we have imports above 20 billion Swedish crowns, and the import share here again of Europe is quite impressive. Basically what I want to point out, because we have production and we have import and we have export. The Swedish production is mainly for exports, and other furniture which are produced for the Swedish market mainly focus on public places or businesses, schools, offices, restaurants, what have you. So not the Swedish homes, but rather the office settings or business settings. So that share is partly covered by Swedish production, but again, Swedish production mainly is destined for exports. This means that when we look at the imports, the Swedish imports, these are mainly destined for the furniture retail market. So these are destined for the Swedish consumers, end consumer, the Swedish homes, as I just called it. So we are dealing with slightly different market segments here. So just comparing the figures is not enough. We also need to see where the different parts are destined for. And then this will, I will leave this up a little bit for you to have a look at if you can recognize your own product group. The blue bars here show Swedish exports. So basically what I pointed out, that's 75% of Swedish production is destined for exports. And the orange bars are Swedish imports, where we can see that, for instance, mattresses, which were included in the HS code, which was one of the top sectors or product groups exported from Ukraine to Sweden, they are definitely one of the larger importing groups here. Other than that, of course, we always have the if we deal with statistics, we always have the categories, parts of or other furniture. The parts of could be interesting also to point out, because I've just explained how basically imports are destined for the retail markets and Swedish production for exports or businesses. Of course, Swedish production to some extent also imports parts of furniture. So if a piece of furniture is produced in Sweden, it doesn't mean that the 100% piece has been produced fully from scratch in Sweden. You could also have the case where parts have been imported. And that could be, for instance, because there's craftsmanship going on there, which is maybe not even available to a commercial extent in Sweden, or just maybe something that is offered at a more efficient or better level in the country from which it's imported. So these are, well, those are the channels, let's say, that we have. Now, talking through a little bit the Swedish retail landscape, I already pointed out we have a lot of indoor shopping malls. It's quite clustered. You go to one place, you can go by car, you park it, you stay indoors, and you do your shopping. Basically, this is also seen in the retail landscape in terms of what kind of companies we have that are represented there, where 14 companies make up half of the Swedish retail market. Now, the top companies shown here now, the three first ones are supermarkets where they sell food, groceries, obviously, but they do lots more than that as well. So here you would also certainly find some interior design. They have, like you can tell, there are large supermarkets, so they also have a large assortment, if you like. And then we have a little bit more to the point, perhaps, for the sectors we're dealing with today, IKEA and H&M. Both of them also open, IKEA obviously really big in furniture, and H&M also interior to some extent. These are also in the top 14 companies, Swedish companies, both IKEA and H&M, and they also top the retail market in Sweden. Zooming in a little bit more on the sector product groups that we're talking about here today. Yes, IKEA, I will mention again as furniture and interior retailers. Obviously, this is one company focusing on the lower price segment, which does not exclude them being massively trendy. So also something to keep an eye out on for what's happening there in terms of trends. You can basically look up any of these also afterwards and check out their assortment and see which fits your segment that you are in. To provide some example, if we have to the right Mio, that would be sort of one step above IKEA in terms of segment. So a little bit more quality and a little bit more price. As an example, on the lower side, the bottom to the left, you have Kinnarps or Kinnarps with K that you see. That one would be an example of perhaps importing parts, but mainly producing for Swedish businesses, offices, etc. And Hemtex under Mio would then again be if you work with home textiles, that is a large retailer. Now, some of them that I show here, as I mentioned, they have their own production. Some of them will import parts of products. If we look at the one between IKEA and Mio, Svenska Hem, that's a retailer offering several different brands. And I have an example here, because obviously if you want to reach the Swedish retail market, you can go through a Swedish brand, or you can do private label for a Swedish company, or there could be through any other international or European brand, and that's which also has market share in the Swedish retail market. So these are just things to bear in mind when you do your market research. As I pointed out, also only import statistics or export production doesn't give the whole picture. So this is already digging a little bit deeper into the story, if you like. And one thing I want to point out, I already mentioned e-commerce, e-business, which is booming in general, if you like. Here you have the furniture and interior markets compared to other segments in the Swedish market of online sales. It represents 12% of total Swedish online sales. This is obviously interesting as a channel in itself, but also something to bear in mind when we talk about packaging. Packaging, of course, is becoming quite an issue or something to think about when we talk about e-commerce, seeing everything is being shipped to consumers. So how do you make your packaging as small or as flat or convenient as possible? And here, of course, we have IKEA certainly setting an example in how to make packages flat, if you like. Only then you have to assemble them yourself as well. That basically brings me to what I wanted to say about the Swedish market. And I would now like to share some thoughts with you about how to find a buyer, as well as sharing some good sources for you to have a look at also after this webinar when you start doing your own market research if you are interested in the Swedish market. Basically, today, because of the situation we are in, I've said how to find buyers online, because quite easily we would say visit the right trade fairs. This is obviously not really a possibility in today's situation. However, this presentation has clustered a lot of different sources. Have a look at all of them and always bear in mind what you produce and how your offer could match what you see in the companies that you look into. A good way to do it is, even if there are no live trade fairs being organized now, some certain sub-events, let's say, turn online. That's definitely something to keep an eye out on. I have compiled a list of trade fairs for you guys that I will share in one of the slides after this one. Look up everything, exhibitor list, look up the companies online, everything I mentioned now. Also, want to point out, look up their website, but also look up social media. It might not be a great idea on social media to do a sales pitch to someone you haven't met. However, it could very well be a good idea to connect online, to join similar groups dealing with similar interests, be that trends, be that wood, be that forest preservation, be that what have you. But to join those groups and through dialogues, conversation, sharing knowledge and experience, show that you are out there and that you are a reliable partner. It's a way basically to provide an image of your company as the more information you share and show that you know what you're talking about. The image will be that both that you know what you're talking about, but also that this company is serious and here to stay, basically. So especially in the situation we are in right now, where travel is not possible, make use of being active online, on social media, and take that opportunity to show your company also to potential buyers. Basically, if you talk to companies and if you visit trade fairs and just ask in general, basically all of them are open for new connections, and you just need to find the right timing, the right tone, the right common interest. What can you sort of find a win-win situation where everyone gains from the relationship? So always bear in mind, you look up the companies I mentioned and companies you can find in other sources that I've provided here. Does it match with what you can offer? Your techniques, your product, your materials, your design, and so on. Now, Emma already pointed out a little bit the relation between regulatory requirements, which are legal set by law, and also the link with private standards, which sometimes can just be, you show compliance with legal requirements as the FSC, but also the second label there, the PEF label. They both show that your timber is legally harvested, basically, and that has become a way to show that you meet European requirements, regulatory requirements, I mean. The examples I mentioned here are based on a screening of large furniture and interior companies in Sweden. So if they work with textiles, they're bound to work with Oekotex, the one I have to the right over there. If cotton is included, the Better Cotton Initiative is often the case that they require, and so on. And of course, the EU Eco-label, which Emma already pointed out, which is applicable for several materials. And of course, if you set out to do business with Sweden, I already pointed out briefly how Sweden works with the large distances, e-commerce, and so on. Now we're sort of digging a little bit deeper into the Swedish mind, if you like. Swedes can be, up in the right-hand corner, have their sort of value their Swedish traditions, yet they're really modern, and this doesn't have to contradict each other. On the other hand, I mean, quite the opposite, really, because then we have this nice traditional designs, if you like, that get a modern touch, and that becomes the modern Swedish sort of, you have the nostalgic part of it, which is combined with something more modern, perhaps a new material or new lighter color with a traditional design, which is only part of it and not all of it, but just experimenting with a sort of fusion thing going on there, if you like. I already pointed out the distances, and then we have nature and space. Again, Sweden is a large country. A lot of it is covered by forests. You have a lot of lakes, water, etc. Nature and space is part of, it's visible, let's say, if you look at Swedish and Scandinavian in general design, and this is part of life, really. And I also put out the 2 coffee cups over there, a work-life balance and fika. Now, fika, you will probably recognize if you have been in touch with Swedish people. It's a nice word for saying, let's have a coffee or a coffee break, where you just sit down and small talk, or can have something nice to go with it also, not just the black coffee. In general, and I know certain people would disagree with me, and it always depends on what you compare it with. Swedes take their regular holidays, they have days off, they have a balance, meetings end on time so that people get home in time to pick up their children from daycare, what have you. The combination between work and family life, basically the aim is to have a good balance and to make it all work in one go and not to have one suffer because of the other. Also a lot of women working in the Swedish, all sectors basically. So yeah, those are sort of the visible things that you can see. I have a few more words on this, again, with a link where you can read more. Basically, Swedes tend to be quite informal, which is not that you talk about your family in the first meeting necessarily, maybe a small talk, but not more. But it tends to be more like, okay, everyone is allowed to join in. Everyone's opinion is valued. We're all at the same level, egalitarian, I call it here. And a lot of discussion going on, discussions and details to gain the best results, as I explain it here. And also really open, transparent, and also expect the same from you. Because if you deal with a Swedish business person and there is a problem, for instance, then he or she will want to know, because this has an effect also on promises that he or she has made, for instance. So be open about it, discuss about it, come to the best result. The sort of starting point is that we're here to solve this and to make the best of the situation. So there is this initial trust, at least, and try to make the best of that and just be as open and transparent back, basically. And here are we have now entered a part of my talk. I will soon hand over back to Emma again. But I have collected, as I said, quite a few sources that you can check out. These are of trade fairs, trade shows. As you can see, I have there are Swedish shows and mixed with European ones. Again, Sweden is a European country. If you go to a European trade show or trade fair, or enter their websites and look at exhibitor lists today, as we cannot go to them physically now, then Swedish exhibitors will be there as well, of course, because this is Europe, and a lot of the businesses are global anyway. But of course, I've also put in a few typically Swedish ones in between, which will, generally speaking, be smaller, but also attract particularly Swedish and Nordic style markets, if you like. But I would invite you to check them out, all of them, look at exhibitors, look at their assortments, and see, as I said, how your products fit in. And finally, I have a lot of the information I used here in the earlier slides came from these sources. Particularly the last one I say is an online magazine. It is in Swedish, as some of these sources are. Many have at least a summary in English, but you find more if you search in Swedish, basically. The reason I mentioned this magazine here is because it's nice to just look through it. You can do so online. You will see new brands, you will see styles. Again, always bear in mind, how do my products, what I offer, how does it fit in terms of being part of a product, in terms of being a final retail product, where would it fit according to you? Because that will be helpful in your research. So that's it for me for now. Emma, I will hand over to you, and of course stop my share so you can continue sharing your slides.
Thank you. I hope you see my screen now. So I will talk about the last point in our presentation, which is the conditions for export. So when you have, as Tove mentioned, when you've done the market research, looking at the buyers, then it's time for the final export. So here you can ask yourself, what are the custom duty for my product? Is there any preferential treatment when exporting to the EU? So is there a free trade agreement, for example? And do the products match the rules of origin? So first of all, the trade between EU and Ukraine is covered by the DCFTA, the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area. And this is part of the association agreement between EU and Ukraine. And this means that most of the exports from Ukraine enter the EU without customs duties or quantitative limits. And for you as exporters, the main benefits of the DCFTA is the reduction of tariffs. So 98 to 99% of all tariffs are removed or reduced when it comes to trade between EU and Ukraine. But also there will be a gradual alignment with EU legislation and standards. This will be in many different sectors. So in the food sector, but also industrial products as well. And this means that there will be fewer technical obstacles to export. So in the long run, many of the legislation will be the same between EU and Ukraine when it comes to product-specific requirements and standards. But in order to get this preferential agreement, so this reduction in tariff, it is important that the product comes from Ukraine. And these rules are product specific and they can differ between different agreements. But I will here just give you the overall idea and the two different types of origin criteria. This can be quite complicated, and as I said, it's different for different products. So if you have questions on this, contact us and we can help you. We also have some experts on rules of origin that works within the National Board of Trade that can also assist. But in general, the two types of criteria is first wholly obtained, which is rather straightforward. It's basically anything that comes from the sea, from the ground, or from animals are obtained and origin in Ukraine. Substantially transformed is a bit more complicated, and many of the different products today have components that comes from different countries. This can be textiles from another country that is sewn into clothes. It can be all different types of components to make a cell phone or anything. But it's very rare that all components come from one same country. So there are three different ways of seeing if it's substantially transformed as much, so it will become origin in that specific country. So for example, there is the value added rule, which means that you look at the value of the imported goods, and that can have a certain percentage or under a certain percentage of the export price. And if it's an under a certain percentage, it can be 30% or 20%, it depends. Then it will still be of Ukrainian origin. The change of tariff heading is if you import something from one HS code tariff heading, for example, a straw, and then you make something else out of it, like a straw hat, then you have changed the tariff heading of the product, and that means that you've changed the origin, or that the origin is Ukrainian origin. Again, I will not go into more detail here, but feel free to ask me afterwards. So, in order to benefit from this rules of origin, you need to have something to prove that it has the origin. So sometimes we call rules of origin the nationality of a product, and we call proof of origin the passport that comes with it. In Ukraine, EU-Ukraine, you use a certificate called Euro 1. And if you don't have this, you export to Sweden and EU without preference. So you use the general customs duties. Depending on the different products, this can vary, but it can be a 12-17% customs duty, which of course can be a lot of money. So it's please make sure that you look into this rules of origin and see that your product has the rules of origin, and that you get this proof of origin, because it can save you a lot of money. But I also want to tell you that it's not always worth getting this certificate, because sometimes the general tariff is 0%. And then, of course, you don't need a proof of origin, because it will always be 0%. And this trade help desk from the European Commission that I mentioned earlier, they have both the general tariff and the specific tariff for that specific country. So there you can easily find what is the general and what is the tariff for Ukraine. And this was actually all of our presentation. If you have any questions, we can take that now. I also, as we have mentioned throughout this session, please feel free to email us, and we will try to answer questions specifically from you. I will, I think, stop sharing now, and maybe we can take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I see there are no questions. One question from Polly Chesnakova. It's interesting to hear whether Sweden is interested in social responsibility of Ukrainian companies. If yes, how can the company demonstrate this to the buyer? Can you please, I don't know, maybe Tuve, or maybe it's rather for Tuve, or for Emma, please, about social responsibility and how do you sell it in Sweden to the customer?
Yeah, Tuve, do you want to?
Yes, certainly. Is my microphone on? Yes.
Yes.
So yes, basically the examples we gave with the certification, the private standards, those are the easiest way to show compliance. So there, if we talk about timber, we have FSC, for instance. If we talk about textiles, we talked about Ecotext. Those are the basic ways of not only showing compliance with legislation, but also showing compliance with sustainability. This is particularly true for the larger companies. They have their own ambitious agenda, if you like, in terms of sustainability. When they work with suppliers, they quite often turn to certification as a means of proving it to both themselves and everyone else, also consumers. Some, and especially smaller ones, will work in a less, let's say, stringent way. They can work more with a dialogue, but like the larger companies we were talking about, they do not have direct dialogue with every supplier, and that's where certification comes in handy. Now, having said all this, the larger companies, two of the ones that I showed on the screen with IKEA and Kinnarp, for instance, they actively also include circular economy as an ambition in their own policy. This means basically, if you really look to circular economy, it means to design out waste. So this could mean either making sure the products they put on the market never reach a stage that is called waste, but can always be reused, or at least parts of it, fibers in the end, perhaps. So that's also the direction it's going. There we have no certification. This is just an ambition of the companies themselves. And of course, in order to achieve this, they need to get suppliers along. So they will, at this point, not require it from a Ukrainian supplier, but it is the general direction that we're moving towards. So I hope this answers the question.
Okay, thank you, Tuve. Second question from Artyom Palutin. Which rules exist in Sweden when it comes to work of workers of Ukrainian company on Swedish territory? If, for instance, some Ukrainian workers are going to Sweden to some object to assemble furniture on some object, so how is it regulated?
That is a very good question. I don't think I can answer it right now. Actually, I have focused here mainly on the product requirements. This will be more of a service, but I will definitely, I can look into that and maybe give an answer via email directly to the company. Because it's a little bit different, because then it will be more of a supplying a service.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is more about other criteria which are important for Swedish consumers, Swedish buyers, except for price. So it's quality management, ISO, like corporate social responsibility, sustainability issues, anti-corruption, fire safety, ecology, whatever. Could you please tell me how the Swedish buyer, which values are most important for Swedish buyer of furniture in this regard?
I don't know if Tove is here, but I think
yes. Can you hear me? Or? Yes,
I can hear you.
I think this is. Yes, I think that, yeah, I'm sorry about the video. I don't know why it has such a delay. I hope you can freeze it or something, because it looks horrible. But basically, I think this overlaps a little bit the previous question regarding sustainability. So it's not so much that there is one which is bigger than the other, only if we look at timber, for instance, there, of course, making it legally harvested has become European legislation. It's become law. If you look at social standards, it hasn't reached that far, but there are certainly examples of it going in that direction as well. So I wouldn't really say that one is more important than the other. It's basically look at the whole package. And to this date, really, certification is the best means of showing that you comply.
Okay, so certification is the most important. A question from Andrei Prigoda: if you can somehow support in further contacts with Swedish retail chains that you mentioned. I think Emma already mentioned Open Trade Gate Sweden service, which you can always write to. But please tell me, Tuve and Emma, how you can support Ukrainian producers in like business-to-business contacts. Is there any possibilities for that?
So for Open Trade Gate Sweden, we do not provide any B2B contacts. We mainly focus on the information part. So here working with information. We work with the matchmaking and the B2B only in our long-term projects. However, I think, again, I would recommend maybe looking into our website where you can find information on how to find a buyer. Also, the tips that Tove gave about looking online, doing research, it's one way. So that's what I would say in regards to that. I think first of all, doing the research and then approaching the companies.
Another question is for you too, also from Artem Palutin. So, is there a sort of on the Swedish market? What is the general attitude to foreign suppliers? Is there any in Sweden any protectionism on the furniture market, or how does Swedish companies work with suppliers from outside?
Well, basically, there needs to be a match and a win-win, like I said. If you look at, I mean, we already saw China is still the largest supplier, right, of one of the larger sectors you have. Looking at a trend and perhaps more of an aim that a lot of Swedish companies have is to source closer to home, so nearshoring. Nearshoring does not have necessarily mean that it's Swedish origin. Of course, Swedish origin, made in Sweden, produced from Swedish material, it does have a market value, a marketing value, if you like. However, it's not going to be feasible to have everything 100% Swedish, but it is something that if you do produce 100% Swedish, this is something you say also. That said, I mean, Ukraine is relatively nearby the Swedish market, so the nearshoring trend could actually have a positive effect here.
Okay, one last question before we go to next speaker is if you can advise any sources which reflect the consumer behavior of Swedes regarding interior solutions.
Yeah, actually, well, first of all, I would say the IKEA catalog is full of inspiration, as you probably already know. But second of all, no, there is like the magazine that I shared. That one is quite good. All the trade fairs, they show quite nice and trendy picture also. I mean, if you go to a trade fair in this sector, they always look nice because they show good combinations of materials, good combinations of colors, etc. So those are really good ones to look into. So I think if you go through, I hope we will share the sources that Emma and I were just sharing in our PowerPoint presentation. I hope that will be shared with everyone joining in today, because just browsing through those will give quite a good impression, I think, as a beginning.
And also, not specifically for Sweden, but in general for EU, I think we didn't mention it here, but it's a Dutch organization called CBI that has a lot of information on their website regarding import to EU. So you can find a lot of market information on how to find a buyer, for example, and there are specific studies for furniture, and I think also the sectors, the Northern European sector, Central Europe, and so on. So I can add that link in my presentation, and so that will also be included.
Okay, thank you. Another maybe question, one company is asking, is producing wooden coffins. So do you think it can be interesting for Swedish markets, wooden coffins produced in Ukraine?
That is a very specific one. I think we would need to look it up, actually, how that's a sector I'm not extremely familiar with, I must say.
Yeah.
We can look it up and add something in it in our presentation.
Окей. So, thank you, then, Emma and Tuve. І тоді ми переходимо до нашого наступного спікера. Це представник української компанії, яка виробляє меблі Вовін. Пан Володимир Турчин люб'язно погодився розказати про свій досвід роботи зі шведами, зі Швецією. Тож, пане Володимир, слово вам. Яке ваше враження від шведів, від культури, взагалі від ринку? Будь ласка.
Good afternoon, partners, colleagues, friends. I am Volodymyr Turchin. I'm the managing partner of Divin Company. I will say a few words about myself. And I was invited to share my experience. I didn't refuse. I was happy to share because we had quite a long way since 2015. I had many fears as to how to export, and maybe after listening to me, some will want to export, some will refuse from exports. These are our labels, Möbel Stillhaus, Möbel and Vau In. These are the sofas which we started to export, and now we sell them in Ukraine. I would like to thank those who are with me. These are their names. I would like to thank my team. I call them my family, House Mobile. I've been working for 23 years. We are implementing Kaizen since 2009. You probably know what Kaizen is. I believe that in 10 years, in some time, Kaizen will become an inseparable component of some successful company. How to compare it, what to compare it with having a wife, for example, I believe. Then the trademark House Mobile. We export about 60% to Europe, and now Euro goes up, and this now we have a big share of it. The main countries where we export are Denmark, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Sweden. And then we have the trademark Möbel Still and Vau In, and that's about 40% of export. We have 200 plus employees. Export gave us the main advantage: stable non-season and stable income during non-season. Always select the most complicated way. You will not meet competitors there. From Charles de Gaulle. How we got this idea of export? We got this idea in 2015. You all remember we had Maidan, war started. The market was falling. We had to do something, and who can help us but the foreign countries? The West is with us. The West is with us. They have always been with us, and they are still with us. We made the decision to go to Köln fair. We organized the products which we were selling in the Ukrainian market. We prepared all the booklets, and we booked the hotels, and we went there. This fair was not very successful, but after the fair, everything was like that. The last one was rooster, not defeated. Then the gates closed. The last one was this rooster. What have we received from the fair? We sold something to retail customers. It was prohibited to do it, but I share my experience, but not the legal side. You can do it or not do it. We had to fill in the truck that took our furniture to the fair. Our interpreter, parallel to our work at the fair, was looking for the partners. She was looking for some furniture that people wanted to sell, and our driver collected such furnitures, and we would bring back the furniture which was packed. No one asked us about that, and we then sold this furniture. What we got from the market, that was a SWOT analysis for 20,000 euros. It was somewhat expensive, but what we got 100 contacts and one contract. What was the positive? What were our strong sides? We have a strong design department. They have the experience of more than 20 years and very high quality of products. Ukrainian market knows as well. What was negative? We didn't know the market. We didn't have European design. No one knew our brand in the market, and we formed the price incorrectly. What were the opportunities? The opportunities was to have innovation models, long-term contracts, a stable market, and new skills. What were the threats or challenges? These were employees. Because in 2015, we got the visa-free regime and people started leaving Ukraine. Another challenge was a war in Ukraine, low incomes and low profits and low margin. Because we went into mass market, and mass market is low margin. What to do next? We were looking for a solution. We wanted to be in Europe, but before you go there, you need to understand why you need it, what do you want to get as a result. It is important to understand who needs your product, why you are unique. It's great if you are unique, because we didn't have anything unique. If you don't have anything unique, then you are a mass market. You need to understand with who you will go, what resources you have, human resources, financial, and you need to buy a leather belt. I will leave this question which you will ask me. Here I made a questionnaire whether my company is ready for export. The moderator will send it to you. Try to answer it. Answer it honestly, because you do it for yourself, not for anyone else. What do we have to do? We had to conduct a market research. We didn't do it in the beginning. That's why we spent so much money. Also, you need to select the country from which you would like to start exporting. I believe you need to do it in such a way, whether you want to sell to one country, many countries. The Nordic countries are countries which have population with high incomes, and people will be buying our furnitures. Then we decided that Arab states are not of interest for us, and we decided that the countries, competitors like Polish, are not of interest for us. Germany is what is oversaturated with goods, and we decided we will not go there because the requirements are very high there. And then you need to have a design. Every country has a special design. Everyone knows about Scandinavian or Nordic design. And you need to understand for which country, which design you will be selling. You need to analyze all the tariffs. And now we are not considered to be competitors in Europe, and we have a good chance. There are no quotas for furniture. Then look at the logistics. In some European countries, there are places where the transportation doesn't go, and the transportation company charge more to deliver there. And also select what should be your channels. There are many options. We opted for agents, for wholesalers and internet shops. And this was a direct client. Also, an important thing to have is to have a product, then take into account the trends of the market. It was easier for us, now it's easier. Our potential customers send the photographs or the prototype, and it makes it easier to make a design. I recommend not to take a commitment to make furniture which you will not be able to make. Think about your production capacities. The market will grow. If you are not ready, you will lose the customer. And also in different countries, the requirements and demands are different. And also emphasize the quality of your product. Like now, we had a phone call, and someone from Sweden called us and said that we continue to work with you because your price is higher, but we are happy with your quality. Then you need to analyze prices, and you can do it on the websites of the competitors or of the companies which are your potential customers. We usually understand that the price on a website is to be divided by 2.5 by 3.5. Also, go to offline shops, go to the country where you would like to sell. Look at the sofas. I'm a doctor, manual doctor, and I touched every sofa to understand what's inside this sofa. Attend the fairs, get prices from the participants of fairs. You make you need to have a business card and collect information from competitors. Also, you can get a price from the potential partner. That's the shortest way to shorten time for your own calculations. In time, you will understand how to correctly calculate the price. It should be correct price. You will not be able to mention the change of price only 3 months in advance. In big companies like Jusk, IKEA, with who we were working, they change price sometimes once a year, sometimes twice a year. It doesn't depend on the uh, exchange rate changes. Take into account the exchange rate. Like half a year ago, we were in a difficult situation. Also, think about what should be the salary of your employees. You have to raise salaries now, then expenditures for logistics should be taken into account. Also expenditures for reclamations. All of them have them. We do have them, and sometimes so we add 1.5% on that. Also, expenditures for marketing, for websites, for fairs. If you are planning to go to a fair, that will mean you have to pay a lot of money. Then also marketing communications are of importance. You need to prepare a short presentation, a short letter for email, which would show what are your advantages. If you say that you are 20 years old, it's not an advantage for European partner. They don't know Ukrainian market, and 20 years in Ukraine doesn't mean anything. Make an electronic catalog, and they love details, all the technical specifications, which would have the weight of the packaging, specification of packaging. That could influence the price as well. For the customers send the news all the time and participate in fairs. We have the product, but now the most difficult task is to find the partner. You can take some business cards, some booklets, and you go to different fairs, starting from Poland and up to the US, participate in the exhibition, in the fair. You have to spend money for at least several fairs, get registered at the sectoral websites and international chambers of commerce. It's great if you have some colleagues who are exporters, and such colleague could recommend you to their colleagues and partners. That's the best option. Just send information. It is important to find the person who is a decision maker. You can find such people on LinkedIn. There's a high level of trust there, and it's easy to find contacts in there, and we find our partners there. Then when you work with a partner, ask him to recommend you to his colleagues. And when you found the partner, when you had some communication, invite such a potential partner to your manufacturing production facilities. That will really speed up the decision making. Logistics is an important component, like all other factors. Calculate the weight of the good so that it's not bigger. Also, the dimension should be calculated because the customer always says how many pieces of goods will fit into a truck. The place of loading and loading, we very often would mix up the legal and the physical address. I'm talking about losses. Also, the date of delivery, take into account the time in the time. Basically, you need to you need to think about the date of delivery. That means the date when the customer will get your product. Also, the payment and should be fixed because later you will not be able to increase the price, and before winter in November and December the prices may go up because there are no permits for Ukrainian cars. You will have to pay additional money. Then income terms are of importance, signing the contract. So requirements to product should be indicated in the contract. Many companies request the serial model. They also request to provide the prototype free of charge or at 50% price. Basically, then Austria and Germany, they demand FSC, but Nordic partners do not request FSC. If you don't have a long-term contract, you will spend a lot of money, but in half a year, your contract will expire. The control of the quality, if you don't have any quality management system, then don't start export because that's too expensive. Conditions of delivery, then packaging. If you haven't discussed the details of packaging and the packaging was spoiled, damaged, and you have to change the packaging, you cannot add this to the price. The price, and again the price is formed by the market. And in the beginning, if you go to the mass market, it should be 10-15% lower than the market price. Otherwise, no one would like to talk to you. Then change of payment. Terms of payment, it is important. We sell everything but sometimes you will not receive money. Usually the standard post payment is 30-60 days after. We usually work with smaller companies, and ideally we would like to get 30% in the beginning and 70% 30 days after receiving the product. Take into account that they have the system of automatic payment. Also, canceling the contract, they can cancel it without warning. They will say that we don't have any orders placed, but if you cancel, you will pay fine. What are the challenges on this way? What are the fuck-ups? Planning transportation, we didn't take it into account, and in autumn we had no permits, and we had to pay more for the truck that would deliver. Then the then certificates of origin, think about that. For some countries demand FSC. If the partner needs you, as a rule, they can close eyes to some certificates. Customs clearance, you need to find brokers in Sweden. We found the company that was delivering and they were doing it. Reclamations, you will have to cover full cost. It is you very often the logistics is very expensive, so you have to work well with reclamation. Strong hryvnia is great for Ukraine, but it's bad for exporter. And the change of exchange rate is bad. Last year for exporters was very bad. This year euro started growing, and that would be okay for exporter. High prices for raw materials while they're high in Ukraine. We cannot sign contracts with Ukrainian suppliers, European prices. You understand, when we buy some goods from Poland, we pay for customs clearance and VAT. This way, it's difficult for us to compete with Polish neighbors. And here I can disclose a secret. If you wanted to ask why do we need this leather belt, it is to buckle up and to be patient. This is a long way, especially when it comes to mass market, especially because our neighbors are very competitive. But there are some advantages of export. That means the stable market. It's quite stable. When in Ukraine everything was bad, we managed to survive thanks to that. It also improves the image of your company. And you can plan the production for longer period of time. You have the guarantee that you can give to employees the guarantee that you will pay salaries. And also what euro is high, that means the inflow of currency, not big expenditures for marketing. If people know you, you may stop attending the show, the fairs. That is one of our works. The Best Western Hotel in Sweden. That's American chain of hotels in Sweden. We have there are our furnitures and hotels. And in the end, I always finish by some quotation. We are not in Africa, we are in Sweden. We're going to Europe, but you have to wake up every morning, whoever you are, the lion or a deer. If you are a deer, the lion will eat you up, and if you are hungry lion, you will die of hunger. So thank you for attention, and I wish you growth. Any questions? Thank you, Volodymyr, for such a presentation. We have a couple of questions to you first. Maybe I was speaking too fast. I had little time and was trying to squeeze in a lot into this short time. We have a couple of questions and comments. Do you have an agreement with the trade chain in Sweden? And do Swedish companies demand the compliance with International Labour Organization standards. First, we are not working, today we are not working with the Swedish retailer. We had a big Swedish retailer, but we canceled the contract because their sales fell. We couldn't influence it. So the second part of the question, no. No one demanded such certificates from us. As a rule, we work, it's like no name, so we don't put our label on their goods, and all labeling is as if they manufacture that. Thank you. People thank us in comments, no more questions in comments, so we would like to thank you for your presentation. It was interesting for me. I would like to thank all our viewers and listeners to your interest to Sweden. We will sum up all this information and we'll send that to your emails, and we'll put it on a Facebook page of the embassy. So all the best to you. Goodbye. Goodbye.